Hello, and welcome to Module 4. Module 4 is probably the first of what you might call the teaching modules of our course. So the first three modules, the first one is kind of getting you started and teaching you how the course is going to work. And the second two are giving you guidance on the major papers of the course. In this module, though, we're going to change pace and we're going to start looking at the material of the course, of what we're hoping that you're going to learn through taking policy analysis. What I'd like to do here is first give you an overview of what is going to be, what you're going to need to complete for this module. Second, I am going to take you through the slides. The slide presentation is called Bardach's Eightfold Path in Policy Analysis as a Profession. And so what we do is we borrow heavily from one of the chapters from the textbook, Practical Guide to Policy Analysis. Hopefully you all have this. I'm really not sure how you can do well in this course without it. And second, I do borrow some from the textbook that we used to use in the course, and that's this one, Michael Munger's Analyzing Policy. I make no claim that you need to purchase this textbook, although it is very good if policy analysis is something that you decide that you're going to work through further after you take this course. I strongly recommend it. A couple other books that I used, mostly in terms of how I contemplated organizing this, are also this book, Contemporary Policy Analysis. Michael Mintram is a very, very good and very approachable look at policy analysis. I guess giving credit where credit is due. And then finally, John Kingdon's Agendas, Alternatives, and Public Policies. Now, I have a copy. Just show it off that I do. But again, all of these would be books that you would need to be familiar with if you were taking the course on maybe a 4,000 or graduate level. And I just think that maybe giving you a chance to look at them, maybe you try to check them out of a library. If you are anywhere near this campus, you will have the opportunity to borrow it either through the Gill system or from interlibrary loan. Not necessary, but I want you to know where the material from the course comes from. So as far as what you need to do to complete this module successfully, we have several things. Now, the graded assignment is reaction number 2. And reaction number 2 is going to be based on you watching the Munger video. The Munger video is about rent seeking and political choice. It was a presentation he gave several years ago. Munger being the same person as wrote the Analyzing Policy book that I just showed you. Again, what you're going to do is it's going to be one page of summary and a page of analysis or your reaction or your interpolation is a term I'm using in another class this semester, what you find and how you might make it useful in your own life. Also, I've included an article from Cohen, March, and Olson called A Garbage Can Model of Organizational Choice. A lot of times what we do in policy analysis is we assume that we're gathering in all of the possible information. And, sometimes that's pretty daunting. And maybe it helps us to realize that the people who make choices for groups tend to not really do that. They tend to choose from amongst the ideas that come to mind. And that's Cohen, March, and Olson's real insight that they add here. Other people, Herbert Simon won a Nobel Prize in economics, and not a political scientist, but he wanted in economics, in not small measure because of his applying this bounded rationality. The game we play, though, the paper we write, what we claim to do as policy analysts, is very much where we try very hard to find all of the different possible alternatives, and then we choose from amongst the best. Now, Bardach's Eightfold Path recognizes the difficulty in having all of the alternatives at hand. I think, though, that he very much tries to encourage people to be seeking and understanding as many different perspectives on how to make policy change and to analyze public policy problems as is possible. So if you complete all of that, you'll be fine. This is a very important module. I strongly encourage you to do whatever it takes to complete it completely, to complete it to the best of your ability. Just because there's only one assignment is not that it's not important. In fact, what it is it's so important that I didn't want you bogged down in needless quiz taking and all the rest. So we'll have one graded assignment. If you feel like you get all of your work done long before the deadline for this assignment, go right ahead and work some more on first reading the Stone book. I think certainly you should set as your goal to maybe by the time beginning of February rolls around to have part 2 of Stone complete. I would I would make sure that I actually read and closely looked at the Bardach part 1. And if you do that, you'll be in pretty good stead for next month. But constantly be trying to work on your long-term projects if you feel like you have the time. And if you don't feel like you have the time, tell the math professor, tell the English professor, sorry, Carl's class is way more important than yours. Anyway, tell your boss, say, boss, I can't work tonight. I have to read the Eightfold Path policy analysis. I'm sure he'll understand. More seriously, budget your time as best as you can, and be continuing to work on the long-term projects. You don't want to be stuck trying to write 2 large papers once we get close to spring break. So Bardach's Eightfold Path to Policy Analysis and this idea of policy analysis as a profession come mostly from the Bardach book and from the Munger text. I would strongly recommend that as you leaf through this slide presentation, we start with what is policy analysis. I assume that if there's no belief that you have to know exactly what is meant by policy analysis to succeed in this course. We started as an introduction, and we work through until hopefully you've gained a strong knowledge of what's going on. But Munger said that policy analysis is as old as and as important as public policy itself. How is the plan that we implemented working is something that is is a question that's very important to answer. As you look at policy making, the Kingdon book informed my slides on the 3 streams model. Remember, whenever a public policy is going to be adopted, there's really 3 different things going on, right? There's the need to do something to fix a problem. We might call this the policy problem. And I think you're going to be spending a lot of time in the next month trying to isolate a good policy problem, one worth solving. And when do we decide that this is a policy that should be on the public agenda? believe it or not, there's a lot of terrible problems that are not on the policy agenda. And at the same time, there's things that we seem to worry an awful lot about that if nobody ever fixes, most of us won't really care. In addition, though, there's the politics stream, as Kingdon talked about, right? What is it that people want to have accomplished? Is something politically feasible in this area? Right along with that, the third stream is the alternatives or the policy stream. When I was in graduate school, I remembered this, the 3 Ps, right? Problem, policy, politics. If you don't have an idea to fix it, it doesn't matter. If you can't prove to people that it's a problem, it doesn't matter. If your answer is not politically feasible, you're not going to get a policy adopted either. So all of those are necessary. So you should take a look at that and consider that with your own policy analysis paper this semester. The garbage can model, you should definitely read the article. One thing that's very notable is that it is impossible to think of every possible solution. It's usually the alternatives that have stakeholders that actually get a chance to get the policies that they need. We talk about policy formulation, the selection of criteria, the comparison of alternatives, and selection of policies. You can conceptualize policy papers and policy analysis in several different ways. The great thing about Bardach's eightfold path is that it focuses on what you should be thinking about as you do policy analysis. And I think that compares to Munger's approach, where he only lists 5 things that you need to do. When you make your comparison, what you'll notice is that mainly what Bardach suggests is that he takes moments to say, now stop and consider this. Stop and really make sure that you're taking all of the major factors into account. Bardach is writing a how to do policy analysis book. The 5 steps in policy analysis, this is probably a better outline of what your paper should actually look like. In a lot of cases, what we do is we do our policy analysis and then we stop and we take the scaffolding down. You know, you have to put up all sorts of supports and things, right, if you're going to replace a roof. But nobody wants you to then just leave the supports in once you've completed the roof. Well, the same is with policy analysis. You know, this paper is not going to be a assignment where you're going to say, and then first I did this, but then it didn't work, so I decided to do this. Instead, you're going to focus on this is not a paper about you and what you did. This is a paper about the policy itself and how it works. So I would encourage you to do your analysis based on what Bardach suggests. Follow Bardach's eightfold path. But then when it comes time to write the paper, to take a step back and say, well, what is actually needed for the understanding of this paper? And so my 5 steps to policy analysis that I borrowed from Munger in this slide presentation is going to be very useful for writing up the paper. But I'm going to be looking to see whether you've taken into account some of Bardach's major concerns. I think that Bardach's really good insights are probably related to once you've defined the problem, then to take the time and assemble some evidence. not necessarily enough for you to write the paper, but enough for you to understand how the policy is going to work. Look at look at the outcomes that you expect and hope for. Look at what people are saying will happen if you do particular things. One of the biggest problems in policy making is the so-called unintended consequence. The unintended consequence comes from not taking into account all of the outcomes that are possible. You know, side effects are very common in everything. I actually was reading a book, a psychology textbook about the drugs that are used by psychiatrists, you know, to help people manage problems in the world. And he says, remember, there is no such thing as a side effect. There are effects. Sometimes they're an effect we're looking for. Sometimes they're an effect we're trying to avoid. And sometimes they're an effect that just are unrelated to what we had anticipated. You know, what you definitely don't want to have a plan that's going to, say, cause crime in a community just because you're trying to solve some other problem like prison overcrowding. That's a bit of a flippant answer, but if you were to think of things that happen while you're trying to fix something else, this happens in public policy a lot. A great policy analysis is going to be somebody who is able to uncover what those will be. I think that when you are looking at your policy or you're looking for a policy, try to think outside the box a little bit. Don't try to answer the question the way everyone else has answered the question. Even if you come to the conclusion that everyone else has come to, try to come at it from an approach of expanding the possible answers, expanding the number of alternatives, and expanding your understanding of how they work. If you'll notice, Bardak's very last step is to tell your story. What he's reminding us is every single step has to be done, completed, and understood before we actually go and try to tell others. You know, we wouldn't expect if we were writing a novel that we would find out how it ended at exactly the moment that we wrote the last word. Instead, we would decide the story we were going to tell, and then we would think about how to best tell it. And so, by the time the story ends, we very much know what's going to happen. I watched a documentary recently on the making of the Die Hard movie, and that's not how they did it, and it worked out. But, you know, unless you have Bruce Willis, I think you're going to be stuck following that direction. All right, so make sure you pour over the slide presentation. Make sure you do the reading. Make sure you watch the video. Make sure you read the article. Make sure you do the reaction paper. If you do, you'll be happy. But also, if you have any questions when that's done, feel free to contact me. Later this week, I am going to be posting a sign up for meeting with me on before the end of January related to your paper. We'll have some time to do that then. You have a while to accomplish all of these things, but I think that these first 4 modules that I've given you in just 2 weeks, you now have plenty of work ahead of you. So good luck, everybody, and again, try to make sure that you contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.